You've been replaying it in your mind like a quiet storm, trying to figure out what flaw, what moment, what tiny shift made him walk away. You thought maybe you were too emotional, too loyal, too intense, too loving, but deep down, a softer ache keeps whispering that maybe the truth isn't that simple. He didn't leave because you weren't enough. He left because you were too real. Listen, some people don't know how to hold a love they can't control. Some men aren't ready for the kind of honesty that exposes their own unhealed parts. You didn't scare him because you were needy. You scared him because you saw him fully, deeply, without filters. He wasn't intimidated by your flaws. He was intimidated by how genuine you were in a world where most people only show fragments. He didn't run because you demanded too much. He ran because you asked for authenticity, something he didn't know how to give without breaking open. When you loved with truth. When you spoke with depth. When you connected, it wasn't casual, it was soul level. And not everyone is ready for a love that doesn't hide, doesn't pretend, doesn't play safe. Some people don't choose what feels real. They choose what feels familiar, even if it's empty. You weren't too much, you were simply the first thing in his life that asked him to stop running from himself. It felt like waking up in a room that still held his scent, but no longer held his presence. A strange mix of familiar and hollow. The silence after he left didn't feel quiet. It felt loud, like it echoed against your ribs every time you tried to breathe normally. Even music sounded different. Songs you once loved now felt like they were narrating your life without asking permission. You caught yourself staring at your phone, not for a message, but to understand how someone could vanish from your daily world while you were still replaying everything in slow motion. Sleep didn't come easily. Your mind kept looping through memories like they were unfinished sentences. Even your body felt heavier, like gravity was suddenly personal. You questioned every detail, the tone in your voice, the softness in your love, the moments you opened up just a bit more. You wondered if being honest was a mistake, if sharing your fears made you difficult, if letting him see the real you was the exact moment everything shifted. Walking past places you shared felt like walking through emotional landmines. Ordinary spaces, now wired with invisible memories. Even laughter with friends carried a subtle delay, like your heart needed a few seconds to catch up. You became quieter not because you wanted to shut down, but because you didn't know who would understand the kind of hurt that wasn't dramatic, just deeply felt. You tried to convince yourself that you were fine, that you were healing, that you were moving on, yet your mind still whispered his name in the spaces between distraction and stillness. You didn't crave him back as much as you craved answers, closure, clarity, something to ease that unexplained gap between what felt real and how quickly it ended. You weren't just missing him, you were missing the version of you who felt safe being real. You're not aching simply because he left. You're aching because it felt like he walked away with the version of you that was finally honest. You're not hurt because love failed. You're hurt because you showed your truth and it wasn't held with care. It wasn't the goodbye that broke you. It was the feeling that your openness was too much for someone you trusted. You're not grieving the man. You're grieving the safety you thought you found. It's not that you can't move on, it's that your heart doesn't know where to store. A love that felt unfinished. You didn't want perfection, you wanted presence. You didn't ask him to be unbroken, you asked him to be honest. You weren't abandoned because you were flawed. You were released because you were real in a world trained to fear real. You didn't lose because he left. You lost because you believed his exit meant something was wrong with your depths. Your pain isn't proof that you were too emotional. It's proof that you loved without a mask. You're not upset because he couldn't stay. You're upset because you thought realness was the thing that made someone stay. You didn't crave fantasy. You craved someone who wouldn't flinch when the truth got close. And here's the truth most never say out loud. You were not too real for love. You were simply too real for someone still hiding from their own reflection. What if the pain you're feeling isn't about losing him, but about how deeply you opened yourself without knowing whether he could meet you there? When did loving someone start to feel like walking barefoot on glass, hoping your softness would soften the shards. How long have you carried the belief that realness must be earned, justified, or proven before it gets to stay? Maybe it wasn't him you were trying to convince. Maybe it was the part of you that still fears being too much when you're simply being honest. Your love language speaks in transparency, depth, emotional presence. So when you showed your heart fully, you weren't trying to overwhelm him. You were trying to build something real enough to breathe. But what if the reason you hurt so deeply is because you gave him a level of access that no one taught you to protect? When did honesty become your currency for connection, even when the other person was still speaking in emotional fragments? How long will you translate avoidance into mystery and silence into depth? You weren't trying to fix him, you were trying to show him what it feels like to be understood. But what if he didn't reject you? He simply didn't recognize a love that didn't resemble his past. How long have you mistaken emotional intensity for compatibility? How often have you sacrificed comfort just to avoid feeling replaceable? When did you start believing that your vulnerability must be tolerated instead of celebrated? Maybe he didn't leave because you were too real. Maybe he left because realness demands courage. And not everyone is ready for that kind of reflection. And the wound isn't that he walked away. The wound is that you believed his inability to stay meant you were wrong for showing up fully. But what if your depth wasn't the problem? What if it was the mirror he wasn't ready to face? It's okay that it hurts. When you let someone see you without armor and they walk away, it can feel like your truth was too heavy, too exposed, too raw. Your mind keeps trying to make sense of it, as if there must be a flaw hidden somewhere inside you. What you felt was real. Your heart didn't exaggerate, and your vulnerability wasn't a mistake. Anyone who opens honestly will feel the sting when their honesty isn't met with equal presence. Now breathe for a moment. Let the story shift, gently. His departure does not mean your depth was wrong. It does not mean your authenticity was too much. It does not mean you should close your heart, silence your truth, or shrink your soul. Some people aren't ready for a love that doesn't pretend. Some people only know how to stay where it's emotionally shallow, predictable, and controlled. And someone who has never learned how to stand fully in their own truth can't always stand with someone who already does. Your mind may have been telling you, if I were less intense, he would have stayed. But here's a more grounded truth. You didn't lose him because you were too real. You lost him because your level of honesty required courage he didn't yet have. You don't need to become quieter or smaller to be loved. You don't need to dilute your feelings to be worthy. You don't need to shape-shift to keep someone beside you. Instead of carrying the belief, I pushed him away, try holding this, I showed up fully, and not every person is prepared for that kind of connection. You're not meant to perform love. You're meant to live it. And the more you stand in your truth with steadiness instead of fear, the more you will align with someone who doesn't run from real. They rise with it. The woman you were before tried to love gently while holding her breath. She walked on emotional eggshells. She softened her voice, her needs, her truth, hoping it would keep someone from leaving. But the woman who rises after healing is built differently. She no longer whispers her heart. She speaks it. She no longer tiptoes around truth. She honors it. The old you questioned your depth. The new you embraces it like a gift. The old you asks, was I too much? The new you says, I am not here to be half-loved. She becomes calm in her certainty, still in her power, rooted in her worth. She stops chasing connection. She becomes connection. She stops fearing abandonment. She becomes her own safety. Her presence feels rare now, not because she hides, but because she no longer offers herself where real is not welcomed, and she doesn't hope to be chosen anymore. She becomes unforgettable by simply being who she is. Lower the lights in your mind for one last moment. Slow your breath. Let the truth land where it needs to. You were never meant to be edited to fit someone's comfort. You were never meant to shrink just to be held. You were never meant to trade honesty for temporary affection. Your depth was not a burden. It was a doorway. Your vulnerability was not weakness. It was invitation. Your love was not overwhelming. It was unfiltered truth in a world addicted to disguise. People don't run from too much. They run from what forces them to meet themselves. They run from mirrors disguised as hearts. They run when they realize love is not entertainment, it's responsibility. And maybe he didn't mean to hurt you. Maybe he just wasn't ready to face what love demands. Not perfection, not performance, but presence, without escape routes. You were real, and real asks for courage. Not everyone has learned how to hold that yet. So don't ever doubt what was natural for you just because it frightened someone unprepared. Don't ever regret showing your soul. It was the most sacred thing you had to offer. Listen closely now. When someone cannot meet you at the level of truth you live at, it does not make you too much. It makes them not yet. Pause. Let that echo where the ache used to live. And here is the final line. The one your future self will whisper back to you one day. The love that is meant for you will not be impressed by your realness. It will be relieved by it. Silence.